Hey guys, welcome to Neat Movie News. My name is Dean Thomas.
His name is Dean. We like Dean.
Or in honor of today's video,
Yeah, they really do work. Then again, the way we hear it, sis, you're doing just fine on your own.
Meaning?
Are you not currently dating Dean Thomas?
It's none of your business.
that's right, after all these years, I have finally seen all 8 Harry Potter movies. For the longest time, I just never got around to it. I mean, I remember seeing The Chamber of Secrets in theaters twice. I remember seeing Prisoner of Azkaban in theaters. But it was once Goblet of Fire came out, and for whatever reason, that movie really turned me off the series when I was a kid. I think it had something to do with the whole dragon scene, which, I'll get into. It's just that medieval type of stuff with the dragon stuff I had a hard time getting into. So as a kid, that really turned me off for some reason, and then I just never continued on past the 4th movie, which, to be honest, part of maybe a kind of a stupid thing with me is it kind of became a point of pride that I didn't watch Harry Potter, which I will admit was a really just stupid mindset with these movies I have. And also something else that I think led me to not watching these movies for the longest time was the fact that every single time I got a new teacher or a substitute teacher, all I ever heard was, "Did you know your name's in Harry Potter?" Like, I got it all the time, and it just so annoyed me because obviously there's a character, as I showed in the intro, and for you fans out there, named Dean Thomas. So I heard that all the time, and it really annoyed me and I think turned me off of the series for a long time. But now with Fantastic Beasts coming out this November, it's like, oh, you know what? I'm finally going to give these movies a chance. Everybody seems to love them. So I decided I would start all the way back at number 1 with The Sorcerer's Stone and then work my way forward. I just saw Deathly Hallows Part 2 in an IMAX theater because they're doing some special screenings right now. So that was really fun. So I've now seen all 8 movies, so I thought it would be time for me to rank them from best to worst, 8 being the worst for me, 1 being the best. But to be honest, none of these movies are really terrible, but just simply where do they rank among the other movies. Before we go any further, guys, I do want to warn you that there are some spoilers ahead. I assume most of you guys have seen these movies if you're watching this, so I'm definitely going to spoil some main story points. I think it's kind of necessary to rank these movies appropriately, so be warned that there are spoilers ahead. So I guess let's just get right into it. And for me, which might be a little bit of a surprising choice to some people, but my number 8 movie in the series is The Order of the Phoenix. This was actually the first movie David Yates directed. He directed the last 4 movies. So after seeing this movie, I was a little worried going forward. And for me, I don't know, this movie just seemed kind of like a one-off. Like, the story wasn't really moving much forward. Yes, there's definitely some new elements that are introduced there, but for the most part, all this stuff with Dolores Umbridge kind of taking over Hogwarts, and they've kicked out Dumbledore because the Ministry's covering up that Voldemort's back. And I didn't really like where it kind of felt soap opera-y. The CGI really turned me off because David Yates has got a very certain sort of CGI look to his movies, and this one especially felt very cartoony, and it felt like the special effects really weren't there, and they seemed to rely on the special effects more so than the practical effects in this movie, and that really turned me off. I really didn't like the Ministry stuff, all of that stuff. It felt like it was getting into the politics of Harry Potter, and while that's important to mention and get into a little bit, I felt like it overtook this movie, and I just really didn't like it. And for me too, the fact that Sirius Black is such a great character, and his death just seemed to just happen and go away, and it had almost no impact on me at all. And it just kind of felt like, wow, you kind of just ruined the legacy of that character with that death. It didn't really mean anything. He went out kind of quickly and really not in any heroic way at all. So that really disappointed me. So, in overall, Order of the Phoenix by far was my least favorite Harry Potter movie, which is weird coming right in the middle of the series as we were ramping up into the, really getting into the final stuff. But that still being said, I have to admit it, I did not like Order of the Phoenix, so that's my number 8. Alright, number 7, and this is where things start to get really close, as it was kind of hard to really pick which one would be here and there. But number 7 for me is The Sorcerer's Stone, or for any of you that aren't here in the United States, it would be The Philosopher's Stone for you. They changed it because they didn't think Americans would really, connect you to Philosopher's Stone, and they're probably right, to be honest with you.
Did you ever make anything happen? Anything you couldn't explain? You're a wizard, Harry.
I'm a what?
introduces you to the world so well. I think the reason that this one comes at number 7 is because the story itself and the villain and all that really isn't there, and that isn't the main point. But as far as moving the series forward, it didn't really do that much to me. That's why it ranks really low. But really did do a great job of introducing you to all the characters, really getting to know who Harry is, who Ron is, who Hermione is, and you really understand what the castle of Hogwarts is all about, what the school is like, and it really builds this world of wizardry so well, and that's what really starts to get you invested into this world, because one of the big things about Harry Potter is the world. Well, yes, we love the characters, it's the world they inhabit that we love so much, and this one did such a great job. The problem with me is they built up Voldemort, and at the end he really doesn't do a whole lot. The villain's pretty bad, and yes, certain things come about here and there. They give some stakes to it, but really this movie is more about introducing you to the world and introducing you to the characters, which I really love and I thought was important. But as far as the storytelling goes, and looking at this series as one long story, I thought this one probably did the least to move it forward, so that's why it comes in at my number 7. Alright, and moving on to my number 6, and that for me is the movie that I kind of mentioned turned me off initially as a kid, and that's The Goblet of Fire. I just had a hard time getting into this movie. I think there's some good stuff there for sure, but for me the actual competition going for The Goblet of Fire really, I don't know, I didn't love the games at all. The underwater stuff with the mermaids and in the lake and all that really didn't do much for me. I think the CGI was pretty bad when he's like half a fish sort of stuff. I don't know, I didn't really like it. I felt like it got into the childish high school sort of drama too, with the dance and stuff. And well, that's great to really get into the mindset of our characters, maybe get some humor out of it. I just really didn't have a necessity for it, and I didn't really connect to it, so I really didn't like that stuff really at all. The maze part of the game I definitely liked, and I think this thing did start to build out who Voldemort really is. And one of the redeeming parts of this movie really was the ending. Voldemort's return really did have impact in the way Ralph Fiennes played him. Fiennes, I think it might be Fiennes, is really kind of just creepy and terrifying. And there's a lot of things he does with his movement that are very, maybe even snake-like, which I know he was going for because that's a big thing with Voldemort. But that stuff in the graveyard is some really tense stuff, some really powerful stuff. You really get to know a lot about characters, and then the death of Cedric really is something that was powerful. I thought they handled it well, that the acting in that scene alone was really great. So for the ending, the last half hour or so of this movie really sells me on the movie, but the rest of the movie from the beginning to that up to that point, I really didn't have an interest in, and it didn't connect with me in any way. So that's why I put The Goblet of Fire at number 6. Now, moving into number 5 was a movie that I really, really, really liked when I was little. As I mentioned at the top, I saw this movie twice in theaters, and that's The Chamber of Secrets. I thought this movie was just so great. I'm a sucker for a good mystery movie, and that's what a lot of this movie was, figuring out what exactly is going on. What is this Chamber of Secrets? What was it? How did it come about? And the fact that it's kind of this dark cultish-like thing. It's where the Slytherin would go to hide, and some very bad dark wizards would go there. And I thought that did really good job of presenting how dark this stuff really is. The blood on the walls, students being paralyzed. I thought that stuff, it really grabbed me, and I just loved how dark it really went, because the first movie is so light and lighthearted and about the fun of being a wizard, where this one started to get into the dark stuff a little bit more. And obviously Voldemort had been built up so much in the first movie, and then you start to realize what he's all about, what he did, and then to realize that he is back in one sense or another, which I do love. I'll get to later, but how this movie actually, I think gets better as you get farther into the series, because you can go back and rewatch it and see certain story points that you were introduced later come back into play in this movie. So I think that's kind of one of the cool things. You learn that Harry's the apostle tongue, he can talk to snakes, and I love that scene where he can. And then to me, my favorite part, I think one of the reasons I love this movie is because of the basilisk itself. The CGI on that thing still holds up today. After rewatching those movies, that thing is terrifying. It used to freak me out as a kid, and they did a really good job of blending the special effects with the practical, and it really made that creature incredibly frightening. And I thought that was something that probably sold me on the movie a bunch, because Voldemort is definitely the main villain, and the Chamber of Secrets is definitely main point. It was kind of the basilisk that was kind of the villain in general, and I thought that because it works so well, that whole scene down in the Chamber of Secrets is really great. How they get down there, just how dark and creepy it is. The set design alone, just how big and like almost like a cave it is. I really, really like that stuff. Obviously, you start to realize that Tom Riddle is in fact Voldemort. That's who he was in his past life. You get the Sword of Gryffindor makes its first appearance, and that stuff is one of the reasons I really do like this movie, and I will watch it all the time. And why it is probably it is by far my favorite movie of the. I can't say that actually. I take that back. I'll leave that one alone right now. But for me, The Chamber of Secrets is definitely one of my favorite Harry Potter movies. It's just so tough to get it any higher on my list, so it does come in at number 5. All right, moving on to number 4, we've got The Deathly Hallows Part 1.
Our world has faced no greater threat than it does today. But you can't fight this war on your own, Mr. Potter. He's too strong.
The movie that was the beginning of the finale, and I think what I do really like about this movie is, especially once you see part 2, splitting them up into 2 parts was absolutely necessary, and I think that's one of the things that really works for the part 1 is because they didn't have to rush all of this into one big thing. They had their time, and they really paced this movie well. And like I said, I'm a sucker for a mystery, so this one's kind of like an adventure in a very dark sense, an adventure of trying to find the Horcruxes and going about how do you destroy these and trying to figure things out and putting the pieces together while this looming darkness is over you, because Voldemort is really starting to rise in power again. And I thought all of that stuff was so great. You really get to explore the characters when the chips are down. You start to see Harry really kind of starting to tap into that. Yes, he is indeed the chosen one, and this is his mission. This is what he has to do. And obviously Hermione is going to be there with him throughout. And then you start to see kind of Ron being challenged with that. And obviously his mind's being warped a little bit because of the Horcrux initially. But at the end of the day, he's always going to come back and save his best friend, Harry. It just so much of this movie I really, really like. This is definitely when David Yates was really starting to get his handle on these movies and going in that very dark tone where you feel the looming darkness over this whole world, the whole characters, everyone's on edge. I love the scene in the woods when they're being chased. The way David Yates directed that and the way it's shot kind of sped up and the frame rate is really, really cool. And then obviously the ending is when they're caught. And there's that scene where Beatrix is more or less torturing Hermione, and it is hard to listen to, it's hard to watch, the screaming. It's a really powerful scene, and this movie is a really good movie. I think it did really good well at pacing itself and really building you up and getting the good story points ready to go, so that when you got to part 2, you could just amp it up and amp up the action a lot more. So Deathly Hallows Part 1 for me is on number 4 on my list. And following it immediately at number 3 is The Deathly Hallows Part 2. Like I said, seeing this in IMAX was a really great experience, and this is where it gets really, really tough, where this top 3 really could have become interchangeable, but the fact that Deathly Hallows Part 2 is number 3 on my list is nothing against the movie, because I really do like just about everything in this movie. The one gripe I have with it is there's some humor in it that didn't really work for me and kind of got out of the tone of how dark it really was. But it still beats out part 1 for me because of what happens in the rest of the movie. To be honest, I really didn't like the scene in at Godric's when they're on the dragon and they're trying to get the final thing. The stakes didn't really feel there. I just kind of didn't like how the betrayal comes about, and I don't know, I didn't really seem to add anything to the story for me as much, so I didn't really love that. But what I do love about this movie is how the whole world comes to a head. Every character you've ever met has a role to play, has an important piece to play. There's questions answered. All of the questions that you've ever had, all the mysteries surrounding this movie are all answered, and they all pay off in a way that I really enjoyed. There wasn't a single answer to a big mystery question that I was like, really, that's what it is? No, they all really worked, and I loved how it all played out. I love the preparation this movie sets up, how it's preparing for war, how each side is really coming at it, how they're about to clash.
Hogwarts is threatened! Man the boundaries, protect us!
I have to go back, haven't I?
It's a suicide mission.
And then obviously I love how it all comes together within the battle. I think they did a really good job with this because a bunch of people flicking wands at each other could have gotten kind of weird and strange, but they did it really, really well, and they did some very interesting things with that stuff. And one of the things that I really, really liked about this final movie is the music. It gets away from that John Williams score, which is obviously fantastic, but it gets more into just mood setting and kind of these dark warlike tones as we build and we build, and then it comes to a head, and there's that kind of like that ominous voices, that choir sort of sound that this movie uses that I feel actually like is what the Wonder Woman trailer used. It sounds very similar, but I loved the music, and I thought it really set the tone and the stage for what this movie really was all about. Now, the last thing I didn't love is, now I do really like the fact how Harry sacrifices himself. He's willing to do it. I love how he's even asked, like, is this going to hurt? You know, all of that. But when he actually dies itself, I didn't love the really weird white sort of train station they're at. I thought that was just kind of strange. It felt like I was really jarring at first, to be honest with you. It kind of took me out of the movie for a second when that happened. But I do love how he comes back. They set that up with all the Deathly Hallows stuff that was set up in part 1, and I really loved all that stuff especially. And then but I do like how it all paid off. It felt earned to me. It didn't feel like, oh, that was kind of a cheap little trick that you guys just did. So I really did like that. And one of my favorite parts in this movie, seen alone, is when Harry and Voldemort are kind of standing on that ledge, and he goes, let's finish this how we started, together.
Come on, Tom. Let's finish this the way we started. Together!
And I love how he's not afraid of him. It's no longer Voldemort or he who shall not be named. It's simply he's going to call him by the person he is, and that's Tom Riddle. So I really loved how Harry really came into his own, especially in that moment. So that is one of the reasons that it definitely has for me that I put Deathly Hallows Part 2 at number 3. Alright, number 2, The Prisoner of Azkaban. This movie is so well made. Alfonso Cuarón, who did Gravity and plenty of other great movies, came into this franchise and did something so great as just a filmmaker alone. And what I really love about this is it starts to expand the world beyond Hogwarts. In the first 2 movies, you're very limited to that and what happened in the castle. This starts to go out beyond what's happened in the wizardry world and these different places wizards can go and they can hang out. And I thought that was some very interesting stuff and about the right time to start doing it. I also love how terrifying the Dementors are. When I was a kid, these things freaked me out. They're almost like they look so much like the Grim Reaper. That scene on the train when everything gets cold and it gets dark, and the lighting that Cuarón uses. So much of this movie is just visually incredible. The special effects are fantastic, and I thought just the filmmaking alone was so great, but he did such a great job with pushing the story forward of introducing Sirius Black, played by Gary Oldman, who's almost unrecognizable in the role. That is such an interesting character that one of the reasons Order of the Phoenix did work for me, because Sirius Black, such a great character, and they kind of just ruined him in that death scene. But what he does in Azkaban, I thought was really well done. Professor Lupin as well is maybe one of my favorite characters, and the scary thing for me at first was so many of the dark arts teachers just disappear and they never be heard from again. But he continuously comes back throughout the series, and that's one of the things I really like, because his character really was kind of this father figure, this incredibly intelligent character that I really loved seeing as much as we did from him. And I think some of the stuff to do with him is how Professor Lupin teaches Harry to do, expecto patronum and those sort of things. And you start to see that Harry is a very powerful wizard in himself, and he's able to do very incredible things. He's not just lucky, because the first couple of movies, it's very much luck. And he even admits that in some of the later movies, that most of the stuff he did was just lucky. But here I thought it started to really show that he is indeed a very powerful and talented wizard. He's not just getting lucky with every single thing he does. And I also really like how Sirius Black, you start to get into Harry's story of who his parents really were. Lupin even gives him certain stuff. And that scene at the lake at the very end, with all those Dementors surrounding him, it's such a cool scene. It's such a kind of iconic, symbolic scene for Harry especially. But it's also because the build-up to get there. Because, for one, I thought the time travel was done very, very well, and in a very cool way that I just love watching that scene, and how all the things that happened initially that you didn't realize are all answered when they travel back in time, and why certain things happen the way they do. And I loved all of that. And the last thing I'll mention is the werewolf scene. Gave me nightmares as a kid. Literally couldn't sleep for a week because, I was 8 years old or whatever. and that thing freaked me out. The design of the werewolf was very different. This very tall, lanky, creepy creature, and that scene used to just freak me out. So I really love Prisoner of Azkaban. It's probably the best. It's arguably one of the best made movies as far as just a filmmaking perspective goes, because Karan did such an incredible job with it, and this really is a great, great movie. So if you haven't figured out by now, you can probably figure out what my number one is, and that is The Half-Blood Prince, which is surprisingly enough David Yates' second movie. So Order of the Phoenix being my least favorite, but the very next movie he did, I absolutely loved.
You have no choice. You must not fail.
Fight back, you coward!
Once again, I must ask too much of you, Harry.
This movie is like the Empire Strikes Back of the Harry Potter movies. This thing is way darker than I ever expected a Harry Potter movie to go. Just so many things in this, even just the cinematography alone, which is this is my favorite movie in terms of the cinematography. It is a incredibly beautiful movie to look at. The way the colors are used, how dark and rich some of the colors are, the bleakness, the dark greens and grays and browns, really starts to give you the feel of this occupation of what Voldemort has done. He is really rising to power, and this dark wizards are coming for everybody. Muggles are being killed, and you feel the occupation of this kind of almost like Hitler and the Nazis, but the occupation of Voldemort and the Death Eaters. I really, this is by far my favorite Harry Potter movie, and I also love the fact because you start to really understand that Harry does indeed have a darker side. So much of his stuff, he was this happy-go-lucky kid that got put in terrible situations, but he fought to get out of them. This you start to see he's doing some very dark stuff. From the book of the Half-Blood Prince, some of the spells he starts to do when he almost kills Malfoy. You start to see Harry really start going into a darker side of himself, along with embracing the fact that he does indeed know he is the chosen one, and he's the one that's gotta defeat Voldemort. So I think the pressure starts to get him. And I thought the performances in this movie are probably the best they've been. I thought Daniel Radcliffe as Harry Potter really brought it to Harry, especially because this is some very dark, traumatic stuff, and I thought he did a very good job with it. But I also want to give a shout out to Tom Felton, who played Malfoy, because Malfoy in this movie plays a very pivotal role, and he is you can see things not going well for him. The way he looks sick, he looks pale, nothing, you can just, the pressure, everything, his mission he's got to go on is just ripping him to shreds. So his performance, I think, really sells this movie. But I think the reasons I really, really love this is, one, I think the twist of the Half-Blood Prince is great. You think it's Voldemort the whole time, or at least I did, and then you time to find out that it's actually Snape, and just how great of a wizard he is, but how dark of a wizard he really truly can be. But the two main points that I really love about this is Dumbledore. You really start to know who he is. You get a lot more backstory, and that continues as you move forward in the series from this point on. But you start to understand who he is as a wizard, why he's been doing so many things he's been doing, the sacrifices he's willing to make. And because Dumbledore had been hinted as being such a great wizard and all these things he was doing in the previous 5 movies, that finally we start to get some answers as to why he has that reputation. And that scene down when he's got to drink that stuff to get the Horcrux down in that cavern, just really start to understand who he is and the amount of pain he's willing to go through, the mentorship he's willing to give to Harry, and then obviously the ultimate sacrifice he makes when he dies. And this movie ends on such a dark, dark note of Dumbledore being dead, Voldemort really rising to power. It's almost like you're not going to stop him at this point. And then lastly, I'm a sucker for a good origin story, and you really get to dive into who Voldemort was as a kid, what he did, how he discovered these Horcruxes and this extremely dark magic. And just looking at him as a little kid, he looks like a serial killer. So the origin of Voldemort, understanding how he came to be, how he started doing all these things, his downfall, but his just rise, becoming the most well-known and most feared dark wizard in the world. I just loved all of that stuff, and that is why I love The Half-Blood Prince. I will rewatch this movie anytime it's on TV now, because I've seen it twice now, because I watched it online initially, and then because formerly ABC Family, but Freeform was showing all of them, and when that one was on, I had to rewatch it again, and I loved it as much that time. It is such a dark movie. It's so well done. It doesn't pull any punches whatsoever. So for me, The Half-Blood Prince is by far my number one movie. And there you guys have it. That is my list. That is my ranking of all of the Harry Potter movies as we get ready for Fantastic Beasts, which I am now so much more excited for now that I know all this history, all this lore of the Harry Potter world, and hearing certain things that I don't want to spoil because I almost kind of consider them spoilers hearing, but about characters that will be in it and the mythology that's going to be explored in Fantastic Beasts has just got me crazy excited. Now, I'm sure my list is much different than a lot of your guys' out there. So, if feel free to jump in the comments and leave me your list. Rank all the movies for you and maybe give me a little bit of an explanation of why you love the certain movies more than I did, or why you put them up higher, or why you put them lower, because I see this all subjective, and I'm sure my list is quite different than a lot of people's. So I would love to hear other people's opinions on it. So feel free to jump in the comments and let me know your thoughts on all of this. Man, I find it's kind of like a hole in my life right now because for the longest time I had not seen the Harry Potter movies. I've now seen all of them, and I really don't know what to do other than just wait for Fantastic Beasts because I've really gotten into this series. But there you guys have it. That is my ranking of all 8 Harry Potter movies. I want to thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you back here next time.